Well, a very warm welcome to everyone who's here with us today in the church and online as we gather to participate in this Taizé-style service today with lots of involvement from people in the congregation. So could I invite you to stand as we have our act of reconciliation. The Gadigal people of the Eora Nation are the original custodians of the land on which our church stands. We pay our respects to their elders, past, present and emerging. We honour the deep spiritual traditions of the Indigenous peoples, their gifts of law and culture, their holistic understanding of country and community. We honour the wisdom of the elders and the dreaming of the first peoples of Australia. We commit to walking respectfully in this country and the journeying with them in their quest for justice and reconciliation. Please be seated. We gather from across this city and the wider land, in this sacred space here and in people's sacred homes. We come with our own hopes and fears, gifts to share and needs to be fulfilled. May we find inner peace and inspiration in spirit-filled community. Through our songs and prayers, reflections and readings of hope. Come, Holy Spirit, come.
A reading from Psalms 36, verses 7 to 10. Listen for the wisdom and hope from the Psalms. How precious is your steadfast love, O God. All people may take refuge in the shadow of your wings. They feast in the abundance of your house, and you give them drink from the river of your delights. For with you is the fountain of life. In your light we see light. As Jesus said, don't hide your light under a basin, but set it out where everyone can see it.
We listen for words of inspiration from the first letter to the Corinthians. Now, concerning spiritual gifts, brothers and sisters, I do not want you to be uninformed. There are varieties of gifts, but the same Spirit. And there are varieties of services, but the same Lord. And there are varieties of activities, but it is the same God who activates all of them in every one. To each is given the manifestation of the Spirit for the common good. If I speak in the tongues of mortals and of angels, but I do not have love, I am a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. Love is patient. Love is kind. Love is not envious or boastful or arrogant. Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, and endures all things. Love never ends. But as for prophecies, they will come to an end. As for tongues, they will cease. As for knowledge, it will come to an end. And now faith, hope, and love abide. These three, and the greatest of these is love. For the words that encourage us to appreciate our gifts of the Spirit, we give thanks.
This is a poem by Mary Oliver. It's called The Gift. Be still, my soul, and steadfast. Earth and heaven both are still watching, though time is draining from the clock, and your walk, that was confident and quick, has become slow. So, be slow if you must, but let the heart still play its true part. Love still as you once loved, deeply and without patience. Let God and the world know you are grateful that the gift has been given. For the Spirit talking through contemporary poems, we give thanks.
Alleluia.
we come to our Litany of Hope. So the original idea for the Litany of Hope was to gather brief quotes from texts that different people in the congregation found had inspired them with hope. Then it was suggested that these people might like to share why they found these passages inspiring, how it changed their understanding or influenced their actions. So the Litany of Hope has evolved into shared reflections. Our overarching theme today is the variety of gifts of the Spirit. So we affirm that the Spirit manifests uniquely in each individual, and we value each shared perspective. So listen for what the Spirit has to say to us. So I'll begin with my contribution to the litany. Then Vera, Vivian, and Alison will share more deeply. Margaret Mead wrote, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has." So this was quoted recently in the Sydney Morning Herald after the headline, "How a Small Regional Community Beat a Multinational Coal Giant." There's a long backstory to this, which I have a peripheral connection to. This is about an 11-year struggle to stop a new coal mine in the rich agricultural lands of the Southern Highlands at Sutton Forest. It involved petitions, blockades, legal action, rallies and vigils. I remember signing a petition in Bundanoon in the early days of opposition as the movement started. Essentially, it was a South Korean company with Australian partners, firstly known as Hume Coal and then revealed as POSCO. In the last weeks of 2021, the Independent Planning Commission finally blocked the project, saying the potential impacts were too great to be reasonably managed, particularly on groundwater, surface water, the Sydney catchment, agriculture and heritage values, and many more. This was a titanic struggle, galvanising the local communities, but not getting much publicity outside the local area, despite becoming part of the Lock the Gate movement. It's one of those small successes by a group of thoughtful, committed citizens that truly inspires hope.
Thank you. My favourite quote is from a book called Daily Readings with George MacLeod. So this is the book if someone wants to see it at another time. He is the founder of the Iona community in Scotland, and it's from the reading A Benediction of a Day. Here is the root trouble of our lives. We all love life, but the moment we try to hold it, we miss it. The fact that things change and move and flow is their life. Try to make them static and you die of worry. So I came across this quote about 25 years ago, and it did transform my life. But it has always been a struggle not to fall into old patterns of behaviour, and particularly in the last couple of years when it was all about control. My natural instinct is to control. As a perfectionist by nature, a planner and list maker, cautious about my decisions and how I implement them, I manage my environment. So this quote struck me at the heart of my natural inclination to control. I thought of myself as being reasonably successful. My life was largely mapped out, and I was well into the finer planning for yet a more successful future. But I was dying of worry. I started to enjoy, missed the second page. So we all love life, but the moment we try to hold it, we miss it. What I think George MacLeod was saying in that quote is that I needed to find a way of learning to accept life on life's terms and not mine. So being busy on the inside as well as the outside, I spent my days waking at 5 a.m. with the radio on, working full time and planning my days and weeks. Travel time was reading time, and I had something to do every night of the week. I soon realised that I had to start with a willingness to do less, to understand what this quote meant for me, and to learn to live with more silence in my life. I was good at making endless task lists, but realised that I was poor at prioritising tasks. So I found a priority matrix which helped me cut my task list in half. I also cut down my evening activities over time, used travel time as thinking time, and increased the silence in my day. I started to enjoy silence. It has a calming influence and allows me time to think deeply. Plans do emerge, but in a kinder way, and by that I mean I've given up the idea of success and failure, and better is enough. Emptiness in both my mind and environment gives me space and time to experience more. I have space in my cupboards for things I need. When I have a setback, I can reflect on it and grow. When I have a victory, no matter how small, I have time to celebrate it. So it is a gentler way to progress, and better is enough. So we all love life, but the moment we try to hold it, we miss it. The fact that things change and move and flow is their life. If we try to make it static, we die of worry. I wonder if you can identify with my experience. Where can you let go of busyness and control in your lives? A willingness to be less busy helps us to stay in the present and helps us to be in touch with changes, movement and flow in our lives.
Well, when Jolyon asked me to talk to you about a text that inspires me, I thought of many of the people that I interview for radio. It's all inspiring. They're all taking action, and some of them are just people I would never meet in normal life. Rooney Khan, her interview kept coming to mind with her hospital ships that ply the backwaters of Bangladesh. She told me about the Rohingya refugees flooding in from Myanmar and how it nearly broke her to see their suffering. She said, "I told our staff we must have courage because we know what to do." And it just really stays with me that shining face on the Zoom screen and who she is and what they're doing. Still, those refugees are there. Still, she's going around in these hospital ships. But the text I really wanted for you to hear was a letter in an envelope entitled "To an Essential Worker." It was in a bundle of these letters, like something in a bottle, letters in a bottle, but these letters were just delivered to the emergency department where our son works, and he showed it to me. His letter was from a girl called Fatima, and here it is. "To the hard-working healthcare workers. My name is Fatima, and I am a hard-working student. I am 9.5 years old. I have the best teacher in the world. My favourite subject is art. I also have a little sister and 2 older brothers. They are in high school. I am writing this letter to thank you for helping us above and beyond. We couldn't defeat this COVID-19 without you. And guess what? One of my aunties had COVID and she couldn't see her newborn baby. But because of you, she is better. And I am so grateful for how much work you've done. I have one experience to tell you about. 3 years ago, my family and I went to the park. We told each other to race on a slide, and when my mum came down, an incident happened. When we arrived at the hospital, it was very late. The doctors took extra care of her. One special day, my mum came home, and it was the happiest day of my life. I am shocked that you work 24 hours a day and 7 days a week. Thank you for helping and curing people who have COVID-19. Thank you for all you are doing to help save our community. Thank you for using your holidays to help us. I am grateful for all your hard work. You have made a huge difference. Clearly you are an amazing hero. Yours faithfully, Fatima." This gave my son a bit of a laugh. Heroes, 7 days a week. Well, 12-hour shifts, and then being asked to do an extra shift, it must feel like that. And I imagined the teacher telling her class, "Well, the hospital is open 24 hours a day, and sometimes they have to work on their holidays." But what inspired me was the idea of this classroom, where the children are guided into thoughts of specific gratitude and the value of expressing it. I know many of you here today and on the screen there, I know many of you have been that inspiring teacher or essential health worker. Your satisfaction must be to know that there are many people living today or enriching the social fabric like Fatima because you knew what to do, like Rooney Khan. One of my cousins is an Indigenous woman who told me at Christmas she was proud of getting 600 people to come along to their hospital for their jab and to bring their relatives. She knew what to do, how to help them overcome their hesitancy. And I thanked her, and I would also like to thank all of you. In the adult world, sometimes money or better conditions are the way appreciation is shown. In my experience, when lockdown stopped me raising funds for community radio through film showings or concerts, many of you came up to me quietly and pressed money into my hand. It felt like Fatima's letter, a surge of energy, as if climate action was an essential service for you, and I will never forget it. How good would it be if the overwhelmed essential services were rewarded like that? If the public were educated by Fatima's teacher instead of the divisive voices of complaint, fear, and outrage. Fatima's teacher used her platform to turn those children's mind to gratitude, but many with a bigger platform who do not really know what to do fill adult minds with unhelpful ideas. It's the same when bold action is needed for the climate or for refugees, in my opinion. Any time when our common good needs to be the headline, a confusion of voices drowns out the people who know what to do. Back in the emergency department, a seriously ill middle-aged person gasping for breath was asked this question: "Is there any medical reason why you have not had the COVID vaccine?" The answer, through an interpreter and gasping for breath, was, "Because I believe in God." I cannot make any sense of this. I don't even know what religion that person belonged to. And there was no judgment on the part of the young medical staff doing their very best to relieve this person's suffering. But right now, there is a tennis star in detention, not because he could spread COVID, but seemingly because he is spreading dangerous ideas. Last night, I noticed the full moon rise over St Vincent's Hospital. I can see it from our veranda. Their lights were still on late at night. This poem by Rumi is to give you courage. Search the darkness. Sit with your friends. Don't go back to sleep. Don't sink like a fish to the bottom of the sea. Life's water flows from the darkness. Search the darkness. Don't run from it. Night travellers are full of light, and you are too. Don't leave this companionship. Be a wakeful candle in a golden dish. Don't slip into the dirt like quicksilver. The moon appears for the night travellers. Be watchful when the moon is full.
This is a poem by Mary Oliver. We're ending as we began, called The Journey. One day you finally knew what you had to do and began, though the voices around you kept shouting their bad advice, though the whole house began to tremble and you felt the old tug at your ankles. "Mend my life," each voice cried, but you didn't stop. You knew what you had to do, though the wind pried with its stiff fingers at the very foundations, though their melancholy was terrible. It was already late enough and a wild night, and the road full of fallen branches and stones. But little by little, as you left their voices behind, the stars began to burn through the sheets of clouds, and there was a new voice which you slowly recognised as your own, that kept you company as you strode deeper and deeper into the world, determined to do the only thing you could do, determined to save the only life you could save. I love this poem. I've loved it every time I've seen it over the last few years. It's about leaving false voices and finding the voice that is your own. It speaks to a few junctures in my life when I arrived at a way forward, but especially one in my earliest adulthood. I was one of those young people who take a long time to figure out what they want to do with their lives. All the voices were advising students to choose the best paid, highest status profession their grades and abilities would permit. It was the end of year 12 and I still had no clue. Our teachers told us we should especially avoid traditional female occupations like teaching and nursing. It was the 1970s and so many careers were open to us. I was advised to do law, but I imagined the life of a lawyer surrounded by conflict and I didn't want that. With no better idea, I did a one-year secretarial course. An inner voice with the short-sighted logic of an 18-year-old told me I could leave home faster that way. The outer voices were all horrified. Secretarial work was predictably unsatisfying, but I continued to have no better idea till I was 27 and found myself the mother of a beautiful baby, whose father was a self-confessed ne'er-do-well. I had no regrets, but I could see I might end up having to support this child, and a new, more far-sighted voice told me I couldn't do office work for another 20 years. I started asking for advice, and an older, insightful woman said she thought I could be a teacher. These words landed in my psyche like a depth charge. For 2 days, most of my attention was on the trajectory of this idea as it ricocheted around my consciousness. It connected dots I'd never connected before. I had gravitated towards children since I was a child myself, a volunteer helper for any neighbour with a baby, striking up conversations with younger children on buses and in front yards. I taught my little sister how to spell. One day the principal brought her into my classroom so she could show off her feats of spelling on the blackboard. My teacher said he didn't think anyone in his class could spell as well as that. I was torn between irritation and pride, but I managed to say nothing and let her have her moment. As a young adult, I still played peekaboo with strangers' babies in queues and waiting rooms, and yet I had never considered a career working with children. As I thought, I remembered the voices I'd heard, the teachers, the careers advisor, the other students. At a social gathering after the HSC results came out, one student told another that she was going to study teaching. "Oh," said the friend, "what did you want to get into?" My father was unimpressed when my sister went out with a school teacher. He thought she could do better. In my world, teaching was considered low-status work. I think I internalised those voices and let the values they represented become my values. They drowned out my calling. But at 27, 9 years older and more independent, someone said I could become a teacher, and a voice I slowly recognised as my own said, "Yes, of course, that's true. I've been connecting with children all my life." To borrow the words of Mary Oliver, I finally knew what I had to do and began. I didn't stop. I strode deeper and deeper into the world, determined to do the only thing I could do, determined to save the only life that I could save. The poem also reminded me of other references in the literatures of the world to voices that are recognised and listened to, voices that are not heeded when they should be, and heeded when they should be ignored. Ulysses had himself lashed to the mast of his ship, and his sailors blocked their ears with wax so that they would not be tempted by the sweet voices of the sirens, trying to lure them to their destruction. The goddess Circe had warned Ulysses of the danger. In the Christian teachings, Jesus said many times, "Those with ears to hear, let them hear." Isaiah spoke of a voice crying, "In the wilderness, prepare the way for the Lord." When the Pharisees asked John the Baptist who he was, he answered in Isaiah's words, "I am the voice of one calling in the wilderness, make straight the way for the Lord." When Jesus was confronted by the Pharisees about the source of his healing power, he answered that sheep listen to the voice of their shepherd and follow him because they know his voice. They never follow a stranger. They run away because they don't know his voice. Then he identified himself. I am the good shepherd. I know my sheep and they know me. It's the ancient covenant. They shall be my people and I shall be their God. It is not an easy matter to leave false voices behind. Ulysses tried to break his ropes because he was so tempted by the sirens in spite of Circe's warning. Mary Oliver's protagonist felt the whole house shake and she had to pass through a wild storm in order to leave the voices behind. I wrestled with the idea of becoming a teacher constantly for 2 whole days, which at 27 is a long time. Jesus also said in the same conversation with the Pharisees that he is the gate and that those who enter through him, this is the hope part, those who enter through him can move freely and safely from pen to pasture and back again. This is the same sense of safety, comfort and nurture Isaiah spoke of in the passage about the voice in the wilderness. When a straight highway is prepared for God, familiar words, the valleys are raised up, the mountains made low, rough ground made level. As Mary Oliver's protagonist runs away from the false voices, she sees stars burning through the clouds. It is then that she hears the new voice she starts to recognise as her own, bringing a sense of company for the journey ahead. The person in Mary Oliver's poem experienced the voices she left behind as multiple. The voice that was her own was single. In these stories, leaving behind false voices prepares the way for the voice of truth to be heard. That voice can be seen as the indwelling Spirit, the voice Jesus left with us, who leads us into all truth. The person who recognises a voice as truly their own knows the voice of the shepherd, the one who can show us the way, the truth and the life. Recognising the divine, guiding, saving voice is the same as knowing and being known. May we listen, may we hear, may we know the voice of truth and life. May we find our way, may we know and be known. Amen.